Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. Created by speakers for speakers. It's your fast track to sharper skills, bigger impact, and a smarter speaking business. Subscribe and download using the link below. And step into the spotlight.
Speakers and communicators, we know the importance of telling stories. We've heard that before many times. And stories really cut through to getting through to people. Their eyes open up. They remember that. And this is something that, well, is something that we do today. And we're using AI to enhance that. We're going to find out a lot about that as well. Now, our guest that we have today is someone who has used stories, has been telling them, has a fabulous professional career. And we are just, frankly, I'm tickled to death to have him with us today. His name is Joe Schmit, and he joins us from his offices at home up there in Minneapolis. Joe, thanks for being with us today here on Speakernomics.
Well, Terry, I've been a friend of this recording in every form or fashion since I've joined NSA, so it's a great honor to be on it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. Now, you have a background in television with KSTP, Channel 5 there in Minneapolis. I mean, doing it just like grown-ups do it, on the air and everything, and winning 19 Emmy Awards. Congratulations, sir. That is wonderful. And you've done a lot of things, but you've learned about stories. And now you're taking that background from your professional career in broadcasting and bringing it into storytelling. Let's start from the big picture first, from your point of view. Why are stories important, and what are some ways that we can start cultivating those stories as speakers and as communicators who are solving problems?
Well, there is power in stories, and especially if your story has a point that goes along with the content or the message you're trying to relay. And what I find, Terry, is that when you're telling a story, I don't use a lot of slides because I want people to place themselves in that story. What would they do? Where were they at that point in their life? How would they have reacted? And that's when you know you have people. But what I like to do is not only tell the story, make sure people can feel the story, and you do that by making sure you've done the research that you tell the whole story. And we talked a little bit about that before we went on the air. That, a lot of times people will tell a great story and you always wonder, what happened to that person? What happened to that woman? I use my reporting skills to go find out what happened after the story ended. And that adds an exclamation point. That puts a little power and a little zing and certainly makes it memorable to the audience.
Okay, Joe, you just got my attention up even more now. Think about that, because that's really important, how we do that. And you and I, before we started recording, we were talking about the great Paul Harvey, which many of our listeners know about. If you don't understand Paul Harvey, this is why we have ChatGPT today. We used to say, go Google it. Now ChatGPT, Paul Harvey, broadcaster. But he would talk about the rest of the story. And I want to find out how you use that idea, that concept, and also we won't let you get away without finding out about using AI for some of the research on that. What are your thoughts on that, Joe?
Well, what I found out is in order to have the real power in the story, people want to know the rest of the story. And I was a kid, I'm aging myself. The radio was on and we would listen to Paul Harvey, the rest of the story over the noon hour. And we always would like it because he would set you up and then he would just hammer it home. And that's what I decided to do in my stories. For example, one of my signature stories is about Joe Mauer. He's a Hall of Fame baseball player for the Minnesota Twins. He's a legend in Minnesota. I covered Joe from the time he was a sophomore in high school, and I was sitting in Cooperstown, New York, when he made it into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I feel like I'm his uncle. Well, I tell the story about how Joe, when he was the big man on campus, the best athlete the state of Minnesota ever produced, he would walk a young student to the lunchroom who he noticed ate by himself and invite him to sit at his table. His name was Mike Hawley, and Mike was blind. And he normally ate alone, and everybody just kind of ignored Mike. And Joe was aware and intentional, invited Mike to the table. Now, that's a good story, right?
Yes.
That's a good story. So
Absolutely.
20 years later, I went back. I found Mike Hawley. I obviously know Joe Mauer. I found 6 guys who sat around that table with Joe and Mike every day. I found the teacher who monitored that lunchroom every day. And then I had my rest of the story, because the stories that came in were almost as if it happened yesterday. That's the impact that we can have when we're aware and intentional of the power of your impact. And guess what I talk about? I try to teach people and leaders how to make more impact and how to be more aware and intentional with their impact. So it ties it all back together.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, that's your book that you put together about impact and that and how we do that. Well, tell us a little bit about how we can use AI and some of the research there and what you're hearing about, what you're doing for researching and finding out more about the rest of the story.
Well, I just used some AI. You can use AI to research, who were the friends at the table? How can you find them? Because Joe lost contact with some of them. I went to the school directory on AI to find out where this teacher was. He was a brother. I found out the teacher wrote a poem called Lunch with Mike, and he had the poem. Of course, I put it in my book, Silent Impact. So it can make you a reporter. It's easier to be a reporter today than it was, 10, 15 years ago, even, going back way back to before there was Google. And now it's right there at your hands. Then you just have to be brave enough to make the call to find out what the rest of the story is. I guarantee you, we all have a story out there where we wonder what happened. And I've done that with several of my stories that I'm able to do the research and find out what happened later. AI certainly helps me get there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very good. And so we can use that now. I find that is now not just a nicety, it's a part of the necessities of what we have to have. In communicating, we want to make sure we're using that and doing it. A lot of times we say, we'll hear speakers say, well, I can't tell stories because nothing ever extraordinary ever happens to me. Well, we know that Jeannie Robertson, late great past president of NSA, wonderful lady that helped so many of us, she had some ideas on that. I'd be interested, Joe, in what your thoughts are when someone would say, well, nothing ever happens to me. I don't know how to get these stories. What techniques have you found that work for you and others that you're working with to collect those stories and to make a note of them?
What moves you? What raises the hair on the back of your neck? What gives you goosebumps? Those are moments that can become great stories. And then sometimes what it does is then you just add to it and make sure that it travels, because there is a ripple effect to every story. Getting back to the Joe Mauer story, the ripple effect on that story has been pretty amazing. So I speak about it in my speeches. I put it in my Silent Impact book. I got together with Joe Mauer and his wife. We decided to write a children's book that all the money would go to charity. And we've raised $150,000 for two charities.
Good for
One
you.
charity that started because of the Joe Mauer story, and I explained that. And then when I went to Joe and asked Joe, why did you do it? His answer was pretty simple. He said, because it was the right thing to do, the right thing to do. Guess what the title of the children's book is? The Right Thing to Do. It's
Yes.
been donated to 800 schools. And in April of 2026, Stages Theater, an award winning children's theater in Minnesota, is making it into a musical. And the guy who took Diary of a Wimpy Kid and wrote the music for that is writing the music and doing the treatment on this story in making it a musical. Yeah, just an amazing ripple effect on one small random act of kindness, one small story. And I've got to admit here, Terry, I knew about this story long before I wrote about this story or told this story. So
Hmm.
when you asked me the question before, that we all have these stories out. This story was in the back of my head for 10 years before I did anything about it. I'm embarrassed to say it, especially with how much power it has. But the light bulb finally went on in this big noggin of mine.
I like it. That really is inspirational. Well, that's something that for those of you watching this and listening to this, this is important. Things are happening that are going to help others. Yes, it's going to help you, but also think about that ripple effect that we're hearing about. Joe is telling us about this ripple effect. Well, Joe, let me ask you this. Let's get on the nitty gritty of it. What do we do? What is a good system that you have found to start collecting stories or the ideas and then to nurture that? What are some of the nuts, bolts, and wiggle pins of putting that together, in your opinion?
Well, when we talked about doing this episode here, I talked about thinking like a reporter. I basically have been a reporter all my career, even though I've been the main sports anchor on the ABC affiliate in the Twin Cities. But what does a reporter do? They ask one more question. They dig just a little bit deeper. They're not afraid to pick up the phone and make that call. And that's what I suggest. If something moves you, there's more to it. If you see somebody that did something good or something bad and it fits into your content, you have to go for it. And sometimes you run into a brick wall. Sometimes you run into a brick wall. I tell a story. I mean, this is the amazing thing that happens. I tell the story about another coach who I covered at the University of Minnesota, who was definitely a people person first. He coached champions, but what he did is he was a guy who put, in business sense, people over profits. And guess what happened? His people all succeeded because they were happy, they were comfortable, they were productive, they were in an environment where everybody was connected. Everything every business wants today. So I tell the story about him, and I'm at an event, and I'm speaking to 400 prison guards. And afterwards, a prison guard comes up to me and he tells the story about his brother. And he said his brother is a guy that he admires, and he admired him for all these reasons. And then he said, "Oh, by the way, my brother was a really good athlete. He won a Division I scholarship. He ran track at the University of Minnesota for Roy Griak, the coach I tell the story about." So what did
Mm.
I do? I jumped on that baby like you couldn't believe. I got all over it. I researched the story. I found out about the impact it had. And I close pretty much all my keynotes now with this story. I start with a story on the coach, and then I come back and give you the exclamation point, which is another journalism technique. It's called the comeback. What do comedians do? Comedians always bring the joke back. Well,
Yep.
why can't we as speakers bring the point back and bring the story back? So it's kind of a roundabout way. You make your point and you tell some stories and you give them some exercises and you go all the way through your keynote. But at the end, if you can hammer it home with an exclamation point that ties it all together, then you have them. Then you have them. Then the people sitting in the audience will be willing to change. They will get it. They will love it. They will remember it. It's a
I
beautiful
agree.
thing.
I think that's really important. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. If you're open to it, maybe we'll roll up our sleeves a little bit and give us an actual example of how someone might be able to do that. Hypothetically, maybe if we have just like 2 to 3 minutes, how we would go into that and then turn that into something that would be a wow moment in the audience that we're speaking to.
Okay, I'll tell you one that kind of failed. Because what happens when we speak, Terry? When we speak afterwards, when we're in the back either selling books or you stay and you talk to people, they
Hmm.
start telling you their stories. And
Yes.
every once in a while, a story will click. So I did this one where a woman came up to me and she was an immigrant and she was living in New York and she didn't have enough money to take the bus to school. The bus driver figured it out and every day kind of gave her a pass to get on the bus alone.
Hmm.
Well, she worked in the medical field. She was a lab technician of some sort. And anyway, the only reason she got her degree was because of this bus driver. She would not have been
Wow.
able to go to school. So I put my reporter's cap on looking for this bus driver who 15 years earlier, I knew the route. I knew what he looked like. I knew his name. I Googled, I AI'd, I did everything and I just couldn't find them. So
Mm.
sometimes it fails, but that does that give you an idea of okay, there's some there. Put my
Yeah,
reporter's cap on and let's own this thing. Let's make it mine. Let's Paul Harvey it and tell you the rest of the story.
yeah, I love that. I think that's real good. And for those of you watching this, think about what Joe just said. This is good. You start putting it together, making it happen. Matter of fact, it reminds me, Joe, of something I'd be interested in hearing your comments on this. The late, great Earl Nightingale, known as the Dean of Personal Development. He talked about the idea of when you get an idea, you should stab it. And what he meant by that was you get a pen and paper and write it down. Because I don't know if this happened to you, Joe, but often might be driving along or something, or I get an idea and I go, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I'll remember that." And guess what happens? I don't. Well, Earl would tell us to write it down. I would kind of agree with Earl firmly on what he said, but I would also bring it up to for today. Say we all carry. I think we're required by law now to carry a smartphone with us, and
Right.
we've got our smartphone or smartphones with us. In some way, you can talk faster than you can write. So often I found that when for instance, driving down the road, say a long trip, might be a while, I'm driving, I'm listening to some audio, I get an idea, have a recorder where all you have to do is press a button. You don't want to look at it while you're driving. And just click that real fast and say, "Oh, I just heard so-and-so talk about this and this. It gives me an idea to do this and this and this." We're recording that. And I think Jeannie Robertson would agree with that you write it down. So what are some of your ideas on that and how to capture those ideas when it's just the raw idea doesn't have anything real spectacular to it right now, but we want to nurture it later. What are your thoughts on the procedures to do that?
100%. And I'm kind of old school. I will put it on the phone, but then I do write it down so I have a file that I can look at a little bit
Yes.
later. Because there's no question. And as I said, they're goosebumps moments to me.
Yeah.
There's some there. So what are you going to do to it? And you can even take an old story and make it your own. I tell a story about a nun who from northern Minnesota who at one point made everybody write down a list of all the classmates, and then write down the nicest thing they had to say about everybody on the list.
Oh,
Well, there's the story ended up in Chicken Soup for the Soul because of the impact it had. Guess what? I'm Mr. Impact. But I thought, how can I take the story to the next level? I go to AI, I go to Google, and I act as a reporter. I found 6 of those students in Sister Helen's class from many years ago and talked to them. All 6 had their list. All 6 remembered every single word on the list. All 6 taught their kids and now their grandkids the lessons they learned from Sister Helen. So I was able to take a story that had an amazing message, but not that I made it mine, but I told you the rest of the story because I'm talking about the ripple effect of impact. And if you're a leader and if you're not making an impact, if you're not leading with your heart, you're making it a lot harder than you have to. So these stories where all of a sudden you can say, wow, years and years later, these people are still she's still having an impact, even though she's been gone since 2000.
yeah, I think that's very important. For those of you listening to this, think about what Joe just said. It's worth it to pay the price, to do the extra research that's there. And that means writing it down. It means sometimes nurturing it. I know that Jeannie Robertson would talk about that a lot. You just kind of work with it a little bit, understand it, noodle it around a little bit, and then it starts expanding on that. Let me ask you this. Right now, we know we're using AI for so many different things, whether we're using Chat GPT or Perplexity or Gemini or whatever the large language model of the moment is, we're using those. There's some ways that it can be, like any technology, it can be abused or it can be used for good. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you see are some specific ways that we can use AI tools that are some of your favorites in the whole process of storytelling?
Well, yeah, I actually have gone to AI. I actually sometimes think I'm funny, but all of a sudden, if you're telling serious stories, that's when you have to have your funniest lines, I find. So,
Oh, mhm.
I mean, if you're going to take people on a roller coaster ride, you don't want them sitting there sobbing, but you do want to move them. Because I always think if you can connect with your audience emotionally, you're going to connect with them intellectually. So I don't mind taking them on the roller coaster ride, but every once in a while you have to make sure you put some humor in there. So I used AI, and I can't remember what AI I used. So I put a story in there and I said, give me some ideas of some humor. Now, I didn't use their exact humor because I wanted it to be in my voice,
Yes.
but it spurred me on to a couple of ideas where, you know what, I just hit a spot right there where I had the entire room quiet. I better tell a joke, or I better loosen it up a little bit. I better give permission for so people can laugh because you don't want people sitting next to you crying. That's not the idea. But the idea is like, okay, now I have them down there. I better bring them back up. And the joke doesn't even. Here's what I found out, Terry. The joke doesn't even have to be funny. It has to be a
Oh,
joke because people want the release.
ah,
And I study comedians, and when we sit there, a lot of people would watch TEDx talks and so forth. I love watching comedians because comedians are one person shows. So you really have to watch how they do it. They do the comeback jokes all the time, but they will take you on a roller coaster ride too. Matter of fact, my wife and I, Seinfeld's coming to town, and I bought tickets to see Seinfeld again because he is such a master and a
yes.
master at the language. I read this article where Seinfeld was trying to decide for a punchline whether to use Jolly Ranchers or Lifesavers. He went to 10 comedy clubs in New York in over 2 nights and tried the joke 5 times one way and 5 times the other, so he knew what he was going to use when he went on the road.
Wow.
So that's the kind of attention to detail. So what I always say to speakers is when you do have maybe that free speech you're giving, or maybe a very comfortable crowd, that might be the time to try your Jolly Ranchers or your Lifesavers. That way you can find out what works best. Because sometimes in our mind we think it's going to be a hit, but it's not.
Yep, exactly. We always want to be testing, constantly test and see what it's like. Well, then let me ask you this. Sometimes we can test, and a great way to do it very inexpensively is YouTube, because we can go on there, we say it, we've got no high cost to it. We try something and we can do it. What are some ways, what do we need to know that's going to be different about YouTube from a storyteller's point of view than standing in front of the live audience doing it? How can we benefit from both?
Well, I go back to the legend in this business, and being in Minnesota, I'm fortunate because we have, everybody from Harvey Mackay to Ross Bernstein to Sam Richter to Walter Bond, on and on and on. Dave Horsager, I could
Yes,
name them all. But Mike McKinley, you remember Mike? Loved,
absolutely. Mike was the
he,
one that asked me to do Voices of Experience years
yeah,
ago.
yeah, and Mike was a good friend of mine, and Mike said to me one time, Joe, use what you got to get what you want. And what I have a TV background, and I'm not afraid to stand in front of the camera and talk. So if you do a video or a YouTube video, I always say you have to be bigger than you are in person, just like you're on the stage. You know, you're not necessarily just a speaker, you're trying to give them an experience. And if you're trying to give them an experience, you have to realize there's just a little bit of Hollywood in there. You better be able to perform. Not that you're inauthentic, that's not it at all. But you have to be a little bit bigger on TV in front of the camera than you would be just talking to somebody. So I suggest people that they go a little bit bigger. The other thing that always kind of hits me when I look at the YouTube stuff, Terry, is my goodness, invest in $100 mic. Just do it right. Invest in $100 light. I mean, I don't have the best studio in the world, but it's my man cave, and I just use it. I light it up, and I make sure A, people can see me, and B, people can hear me.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. I appreciate you saying that. Using the mic here for myself and also my Yeti mic right here. Always got these standing by. And right now with the green screen, it bops it out, which is kind of fun too. But those kind of things are very important. Now, another thing that you are very well known for is using the right emotion. And you mentioned that in the roller coaster, bringing those in and all that. One of the things that you're well known for is your list of dad jokes, which seems like they could be kind of handy to have in the right time when something's not the way you whip in your back pocket and pull out one of those. And so we're not going to let you get away. I'm going to reach through the camera here a little bit and twist your arm just a little bit here. If you could share one of your best or maybe a couple of your best dad jokes, and then tell us a little bit about why a standard line that we can use like that or something can be helpful.
Well, I like to use dad jokes, and especially if you can self-deprecate in those jokes, that then makes you humble and more authentic. And the other thing I would say, Terry, is that the other thing I've learned from watching comedians is when you get to the punchline, make sure your audience knows it's the punchline. Because especially if it's sarcasm, they're not going to know whether it's the truth or not.
Yeah,
I tell really bad jokes. I tell I always tell a joke, and this is some kind of a transition joke, but it gets me to my next topic. I say I came home one night, my wife's sitting with a big glass of wine, and she says, "I love you. I don't know how I made it all these years without you." I pause and I say, "Well, like I'm shocked." And I said, "Well, honey, I love you too, but are you sure that's not the wine talking?" Pause again, and then she says, "I'm sure because I was talking to the wine." Now, it's a bad joke. It gets a laugh every time, but I make sure it's set up, and it normally comes after something halfway serious. And what it does is it gives the audience time to rest. Brian Tracy uses the pause.
yeah,
I like to think I use dad jokes. And what it does is it just gives the audience a chance to breathe. We are trying to move an audience to do something, and you've been in this business longer than I have, and you know better than anybody else that you may give the greatest keynote in the world. And sometimes an offhanded remark, something you don't even have scripted, is what people come back and remember you for. So your words have power. And so every once in a while you have to let them absorb.
absolutely. Well, Joe Schmidt, you have helped so many people. It is such an honor to have you with us here today. For those that are watching this and might want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
My website is joeschmit.com. My email is joe@joeschmit.com. And I spell it with no D's and one T, Schmit. I'm on LinkedIn. I've been sharing some videos on LinkedIn. I do videos for clients. Not quite as good as Chad does. Chad who kills it, but people like them, and I use that as my as a follow up. Just hey, I'm still here. Remember me. Here's our content. Here's a little bit, and people like them. And we are speakers, so we travel. So what I do is, for example, I spoke in New Orleans last week. The conference was across the street from the World War II Museum. I went into the World War II Museum with my camera, with my phone, nice little iPhone I have a microphone with it, and I shot a 90-second video on courage. Boom.
Nice.
So when you have that opportunity, so I always look ahead. If I'm going to be traveling somewhere, how can I implement that into, something that could make an impact?
Great idea. Using that technology and the fact that we're traveling to create more good for the world. You keep doing that in many ways, Joe. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Terry. Can't wait to see you at Influence.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Terry Brock on behalf of Speakernomics. And think about what Joe said. This man has a lot of jewels in this. You want to go back and watch this one again, taking some notes, because this is something I know I can use, and I think you'll be able to as well. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Let us know what you think of the program, and we thank you for joining us here on Speakernomics.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Speakernomics. If you want more bookings, credibility, and connections, your NSA community is waiting for you. Join NSA today. Click the link below and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and download this podcast wherever you listen.